some of you just give me a thumb up if it is on live, and you can check from your Facebook. Okay. So hi everyone. Sincerely apologize for all the disruption just now. I think there's some technical issue. We couldn't continue our line because it's breaking, and I'm sure some of you couldn't see this. So I think the line is clearer now. We can continue, but we are going to start all over again. Today's topics we talk about during the COVID-19 MCO period. We are looking into this force majeure clause. Okay. Now, how does this force majeure clause? What is it about, and how does it affect everyone in terms of your contract? I think most of us are not very familiar with this phase. Although it is in your contract, but it is not always been advised you how does it function, how does it related into the current situation. We will then present to you again very quickly the introductions. I think Satya, you can actually share with us the introduction part about what is this force majeure all about. Yeah, Satya, take it away. Thanks.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Jason. Sorry for the viewers for the earlier for the technical glitch. Okay, force majeure is normally used to describe contractual term by which one or both parties entitled to, or excused from performance of act, or is entitled to suspend performance or to claim an extension of time for performance upon the happening of a specified event or events beyond its control. Usually, this force majeure usually is laid down in a contractual agreement. For example, it can be a tenancy agreement, can be a good delivered sold and agreement, sales and purchase agreement, and other contractual agreements. It's usually focused more to the long-term agreement. It's whereby the both parties are agreed, because this is one of the clause, is a standard clause, because this clause is used when something is out of the hand or something which either of the party can't perform. So this clause will come in and take effect. So, but it's a very odd topic currently that's ongoing during COVID-19. So it depends on what type of agreement and what are the interpretation has been mentioned in the force majeure. Perhaps Mr. Dennis could be elaborate more, Mr. Dennis, on this.
Yeah.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Satya, for the explanation, the introduction on what is a force majeure clause about. All right. Basically, just now I did as mentioned before, and obviously I will redo again. All right. Before we talk about force majeure clause, I think the folks out there wanted to understand what is actually a force majeure clause. In a simple layman terms, before anyone speak of force majeure clause, we need to understand that force majeure clause essentially is what happens when they incorporate the element of frustration on contract. So I think the folks out there know what a contract is. Contract is basically like an agreement between two parties, between parties A and parties B. And a contract itself can be frustrated, which is what we call a frustration of contract. Frustration of contract occurs when a contract, after it was being formed, without fault of either party, the contract itself is incapable of being performed due to what we call an unforeseen event. Okay, let's say, for instance, we have two parties, parties A and party B. Parties A was supposed to deliver goods to parties B, but due to some unforeseen event, parties A is unable to deliver the said goods to parties B, and can only deliver the said goods after the unforeseen event has occurred. So this, all in all, has caused what we call a difference in the initial obligation of both parties. So
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes. All right. So frustration of contract itself basically has been incorporated into all the contractual agreement in a way of force majeure clause. So force majeure clause, to simplify it, we take the example of COVID-19. So I think the folks out there sitting at home watching this online talk has question: can a force majeure clause be activated due to this event of COVID-19? Generally, we have to look at the wording of the force majeure clause itself, or what you can say, it differs from case to case basis, because the wording itself the keyword here is pandemic. Thus, the keyword pandemic appears in the force majeure clause. What if it doesn't appear? Does it still covers this COVID-19 event? So again, folks, it's differ from case to case basis. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Dennis. And thank you, Satya, for the input on the introductions of force majeure. So I'm sure now everyone at least have some idea what is this force majeure about and how does it affect your case. It is a second segment that we are going to go in, because after this, where everyone have a little bit brief introductions about what force majeure about, we're going to look at the case study. How does it relate into your case? But of course, many of you might think that, well, if I'm the individual, I'm not a big corporate, do I actually care about this force majeure clause? Well, in our sense, we look at it, it is very widely covered. That's why we took our liberty to actually look at this topic. Anybody out there who definitely will enter into a tenancy agreement, and as far as real estate is concerned, either you purchase a property, a tenancy agreement, or a sales and purchase agreement, that probably you will have to look at this force majeure, whether it's in your contract, where the first time, and if you have access, it is in your contract, whether it is related to your case, well, whether you can enforce the force majeure clause in your contract. Now, having said that, we will then look into case to case basis. There are plenty of a scenario that we're going to highlight. We will talk about people who purchase property. Then we are looking at sales and purchase agreement. People who rent property. We will look at a tenancy agreement. People who gone into employment. Well, the employment contract could have this force majeure clause as well, and any other contract pertaining to the joint venture or any commercial agreement. Now, before we begin, we will also wanted to put some house rule. We will then spend a little bit of time to look at the case study, probably about 15 minutes to 20 minutes. Thereafter, we will open up the line for a Q&A. If you guys have a look at the line, right, if you have visited our website, there will be some comments on the columns. You can actually type up your questions and answer. We will then address the questions. I will then read out the questions, and we have the panel to address your concern online live. Now, without further ado, we will then proceed to start off with the case study number 1. It is a common situations that many people are facing. For those of you who are in the midst or going to or in before the transaction of a property is complete, you definitely have signed a sales and purchase agreement. So the next question is, how does this force majeure clause in your sales and purchase agreement affect your deal? Perhaps I think Mr. Paul himself is also practice convincing, right? So maybe you can enlighten us as far as the force majeure clause in the sales and purchase agreement goes. Yeah, you can take it away, Mr. Paul.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks.
Right. For sale and purchase agreement, sometimes there will be force majeure clause as well, but sometimes they don't have. It depends on the agreement when it was first drafted. And usually for force majeure clause, it is more to when it's stated there, it's more on the seller's part, not on the purchaser part. But that being said, when we face a situation like today, it is best that the lawyers of both parties to try to engage, talk with each other in respect of the time period to complete this transaction, to be reasonable on it, to take a practical approach, and to discuss whether the extension of time to be given to the purchaser. Of course, if there's no clause of force majeure in the SMP agreement, then we can negotiate. If there is, seller can actually go back to the force majeure, say that they have mentioned that even if there's this force majeure clause, they are not liable. You still need to proceed with this transaction within that period of time. But again, I say lawyers need to talk to their client, explain the situation as of today, take a practical approach. Is a reasonable approach for both parties.
Yes. So I think it's greatly affected because I think any SMP out there, sales and purchase agreement, you definitely will subject to a completion date of a transaction, or rather extended completion date of a transaction. So a lot of purchaser out there will then start worry that I couldn't pay the balance purchase price within the completion date. So how does it safeguard? So I think Mr. Paul rightly pointed out that all case it is dependent on case to case basis. So for people out there, you might start looking at your sales and purchase agreement, see whether there is a force majeure clause in place to safeguard, whether the completion date can be extended without the interest imposed on the late payment interest as far as the SMP goes. Now that is it definitely affect the sales and purchase agreement. Now we're looking into a second case study is pertaining to the tenancy. Now, if you're not buying a property, you definitely is renting a property, right? So what do you think? How does this force majeure clause affect the tenancy agreement? Yeah, perhaps the panel can at liberty to pick up these questions. How do you see? How does it affect?
Okay, good evening, everyone. Just now I did a brief explanation of what does force majeure clause or frustration on contract means to a layman or folks out there. If we apply it to a tenancy scenario, we need to understand there's a concept about the force majeure clause itself is that it does not excuse a party non-performance entirely, but merely suspend it for the duration of the force majeure clause. So let's say that we have this COVID-19 event occurs, and this COVID-19 was part of what you call a pandemic that triggered the force majeure clause. So the question that all the folks and some of us are asking here is that, what is the duration? How long does this pandemic COVID-19 is going to sustain or last? Does it last 3 months? Does it last 6 months? So here is entirely argumentative. But a fact they can't deny is that COVID-19 itself is a pandemic, and is one of the factors that what you say can trigger a force majeure clause. All right, thank you.
Yeah, I think that it is very important because it is will affect your rental, right? Because people will start asking whether should I pay rent or not, right? I think the very first thing that before we answer that, you have to look at your contract, because the contract contain the force majeure clause. It will then dictate and tell us whether I should or continue to pay rental. If the tenancy agreement contains such a clause saying that during the pandemic period you are unable to perform, it's not your fault, then you may have defer the rental payment. So that is in a way affect the tenancy agreement. So moving on from that, there will be a case study number 4. The third one will be on the employment contract, because I think at this moment it is the beginning of the month of May. People are start looking back. Should I pay salary or not, and all that, right? Then how probably we have to look at how does this force majeure clause affect a tenant employment, an employment contract. Would it be a rescue mechanism to all the employer out there, or how does it operate? So any panel who want to take up this pertaining to the employment issues?
Perhaps I'll take it, then maybe anyone, other panel can add on this.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Satya.
I mean, force majeure, the clause is a bit unique clause. As we know, they should include all these force majeure in all the agreements, but sometimes the force majeure clause won't be included in this agreement. If for people outside there, they have to be aware that if they think they can fulfill their force majeure if their contract did not state the force majeure, I'm just to tell them it's a bit tough for them to enforce the contract during this period of time without the clause of force majeure. But in employment, still goes back to the same as per the SNP and the tenancy agreement. If usually they'll state the force majeure in their employment contract, and based on that is up to the parties whether the force majeure take place or not. because the wording is most important in force majeure.
Yeah.
And from my point of view, if either one of the parties are unhappy with the force majeure, just say the employer do not, although there's a clause saying that force majeure due to all unforeseen circumstances, due to a disease or pandemic or epidemic situation, the force majeure will take into a force. But just say either one of the parties are unhappy with the interpretation, they can challenge it in court. But the burden is on the person to prove it that force majeure might apply, won't apply. So it's can go to up to the court. This.
Yeah. Thank you, Satya. Thank you. All right. So any other panel would want to add in before we move on?
All right, just to add in on what Mr. Satya has described quite accurately about the force majeure clause in the employment issues, I think the exact thing that we have to take into consideration is that some employees out there, they will pay in an hourly basis. So again, this apply in in a manner of what we call case-to-case basis.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
So yeah, thank you, Dennis. Right. So we have come to the third case study. We covered sales and purchase agreement, tenancy agreement, and employment contract. So now we will look at the general force majeure clause in general terms of the contract, because I believe there's a big corporate out there that is any other business venture. They will have signed a sales and purchase agreement, sales of goods, of transactions, in terms of a joint venture agreement. For sure, definitely there are certain things will be obliged to perform by one party, but there will be somebody who couldn't perform due to the MCO. So the next, in turn, we have to look at the force majeure clause. So how does this affect, general commercial contract? Yeah. So we will across the board, we will just address in general. Other than the specifically we just mentioned, I think we can just wrap it up and say how does it affect? Is it raise concern to any commercial contract pertaining to the force majeure? Yes, the panel can take it up. Yeah.
All right. Is it me again? Okay.
Yeah.
Just one things that the parties will take note that in the event that a force majeure clause was triggered, parties will be absolved from performing their respective initial contractual obligation. Let's say just now I give an instance of party A and party B. Party A was supposed to deliver goods to party B, but due to this unforeseen event, party A is unable to deliver the said goods to party B. So this period is what we call a period of suspension. But the parties will take note that during this period of suspension, both parties have to take what we call a mitigating steps. Mitigating step can be like rearrange the schedule of the goods, or maybe the payment of the good itself, etc. Any factors that can be considered as mitigating in order to mitigate the effect of this COVID-19. All right, thank you.
Yes. Mr. Paul, I think you want to.
Yes, I can put in a bit, Jason. It all depends, like I say, like we have discussed by Satya and Dennis. It all depends on the drafting of the clause as well in that particular commercial agreement on the force majeure clause. Whether does it cover in this such event, unforeseen circumstances of epidemic or not. And if that's occur that there's no clause cover that, back to what I've mentioned just now, it also depends on parties to negotiate, to talk each other out on, for example, on delivering your obligation, in performing your obligation in your agreement. If you can't, like sales of good, or it is suspended, maybe you have to speak to the other parties when you can deliver it, because it doesn't only affect your client and the other side, but it affects everyone as well. I think the whole industry is suspended as well during this MCO period. So at the end of the day, it is for you and the other side to talk and negotiate, to be practical and reasonable on this situation.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Paul. All right. So I think in short, in a summary manner, it is important in every contract to contain this force majeure clause, because I think we can sum it up that it will give leeway, it will give opportunity to people to defer performance. Okay. So for example, if you are going to pay your rental, but if you have this clause in place, but this force majeure clause is applied to something not permanent, the MCO will be ended soon, and also things are back on track again, then the contract will then be sustained. Unlike the doctrine of frustration, you cannot perform anymore. The subject matter is no longer there. The contract is frustrated. So that is the difference between the force majeure and the doctrine of frustration. But as far as the force majeure is concerned, it gives you a leeway in a way. So that's why it is important at this trying time. Everyone is suffering financially. This clause will come in pretty handy as far as it makes commercial sense to some of the people out there. Right now. So we have basically looked into several areas of the case study, pretty wide. Basically, we cover a lot of area in terms of from sales of purchase transactions to tenancy to employment to all the commercial contract out there. So it has come to the part two of our talks here. We will then it's very loud out there. But anyway, we will come to the part two of our talks about sharing people who can then ask questions from the audience. Then we will address all this Q&A, and then from what I see, the private chat here so far we did not receive any questions online. I think we can open up Q&A now. We have a panel here to address all the questions that you may ask us. We only open up about 15 minutes for everyone to ask. But before that, I think we missed out the introductions on the parties here. Mr. Satya is himself a litigation lawyer. Yeah, he's practicing under the Satya Lee and Co. He's a managing partner in the firm, then mainly dealing with litigation. So further that, then there will be a Dennis Lim. Dennis Lim is working in Jason Kong and Co. and major in litigation. We have Mr. Paul from Paul and Partners. He himself doing conveyancing and also litigation. So we have the pool of panel here readily to address your questions. Okay, let me see there are comments here. Okay. So far, we did not receive any questions yet at the moment. So I think pretty sure either is our explanation is crystal clear. People will be able to understand what we say, and then probably there is no further question to that. Well, we will hang on a bit, and if you guys have anything to share with us, some case study you have encountered, pertaining to this force majeure clause, you can also chip in and share with us while we are waiting for questions on the floor.
I mean, just add on a point. Maybe some parties might be wondering if there's don't have a force majeure clause in their agreement, how do they enforce it now? I mean, maybe many of them will be wondering, because this COVID-19 is totally unexpected things has happened, which take the pain in the entire world. So I think maybe outside of them, maybe you're wondering because some agreement might be drafted a few years ago, long-term agreement, because then they're wondering. From my personal opinion, I think they can enforce with the consent of both parties. Then maybe they can enter to a supplemental agreement. But supplemental agreement whereby these both parties are agreed for this force majeure clause to be included the existing main agreement. So this will be a supplemental clause or terms to be added on the existing. So that is one of the way that they can do. But it must be consented and agreed by both parties. So I just want to add on.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Satya. I think Mr. Satya have pointed out a very important scenario to following people out there. If you have discovered your contract, does not contain the force majeure clause, I think it is the right time right now is to suggest to other party, perhaps you have to sign a supplementary agreement which consists of the force majeure clause, because like what we know, the coronavirus not going to leave immediately. They're going to stay with us for some times. So as far as your contract goes, I think you have to be prepared for such a situation. So I think Mr. Satya have pointed out, it is very important that if it does not contain in your contract, or it does not interpret the way we're supposed to interpret it in line with the COVID-19, I think all of us will have to relook on the contract and come up with a supplementary agreement. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Satya, for the highlight.
Thank you, Mr.
Yes.
Jason.
Yeah. So apart from that, how about others?
I will probably add in just share with you the maybe some alternative, like I was been mentioning, the practical solution if there is no force majeure clause in your agreement. For example, maybe employment agreement or your tenancy agreement. If in the event there is no this force majeure, maybe you can ask, you can't waive your rental during this period. Maybe you can ask your landlord to reduce the rental for that particular month. Of course, because taking on the basis that this affect everyone, landlord also wants to have a continual rental. So basically, you help me out, I help you out.
Yeah.
And for discount is an alternative for rental, or suggest maybe you pay management fee if there's just you stay in a commercial apartment or business commercial building. I suggest that you pay management fees and waive the rental, because there's a deferment payment of loan as well. If you take that into account, uh, the landlord also may not suffer a lot for their loan. And for employment, an alternative is you have to probably, if there's no this clause, force majeure clause, and engage with them for reduction of salary. That's an alternative. Uh, Ask them to consider the company's financial situation. Of course, a reasonable employee will have foresight that for long-term employment, it's best to help the company at this financial situation.
Yeah.
Okay. It's an
Yes.
alternative.
Thank you, Mr. Paul. Thank you. I think there are also several measures in terms of mechanism in place. For example, as far as the employment issues goes, the pre-Hatin applications are there for you to apply, to reduce the stress of all the employer are facing at the moment. And as far as the tenancy is concerned, this LHDN will also implement some tax exemptions in terms of uncollected amount of rental, right? It will be exempt from tax. So in a way, it's also be able to safeguard. So taking into all the considerations of, I would say, a rescue mechanism are in place. I believe there's definitely a way to mediate, to reduce some of the expenses of a company. Yeah, but please do not overlook on this force majeure issues, because I think this force majeure, it will be come in pretty handy as far as the surviving upcoming months and all that goes. Yeah. All right. I think today, surprisingly, not many people are asking. Probably everyone is getting ready to back to work soon. But somehow, if you guys have any questions, you can always visit us, at any time. This video will be then recorded and posted in the Facebook wall. You can relook again. At any one point, you can look for us for any questions. I think we'll be able to happily to answer your questions as well, even it is offline, not necessarily online. Okay, so I think we have come to the end of the sessions. Perhaps I think all the panel will then give us some last tips, get ourselves ready and embark on a new journey of work come Monday or any day that you prefer to start. Why don't we just start with Satya? Satya, you gonna tell us anything for our last word from you?
Okay, looks like I guess about 80 to 90% of the industry will be open tomorrow, and everyone will be rushing to work and to open the. Although some state in Malaysia say that they won't implement such rule, which was good, so they have their own state law. So the only word I would like to say that just be safe and stay safe. Try
Yes.
to try to try to apply the SOP as the government have instructed, and please do social distancing. As now is for us to take care our own self. Kita jaga kita at the moment. If your work permits you to work from house, please do so. That's only from me. Thank you, Mr. Jason.
Thank you, Mr. Satya. Thank you. Dennis, how about you?
All right,
Dennis?
everyone.
Yeah.
Again, this is one of the most crucial time. Apparently, we are
Yeah.
at the. I believe the folks out there, we still have to take all the precautionary steps as we've done for the past 1 or 2 months, because it's better to be safe than to be sorry. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Dennis. So, Mr. Paul, any?
Yes, I think some of state have are gonna start to work tomorrow. So I still advise everyone to maintain social distancing. Be safe. Remember to wash your hand and wear mask every day when you are out. So wish everyone to be safe tomorrow. And
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Paul. Yeah, I think I wish to again thanks all the panel who even on Sunday, you guys are been very helpful and come to the front line. And as far as we are not doctor, but at least we wanted to share some legal knowledge to everyone and gear up all the audience. When it comes to any contractual legal documents and so on, we will be there to give you our thoughts. Sharing on our point of view in terms of law. We hope the sessions that we provide will benefit everyone, and we hope everyone will continue, to strive during this hard time. And of course, always, like all the panels say, get your SOP ready. Be ready. Wear your mask at all time. Protect yourself and protect your family. That is what we can do. But on and off, we will definitely look into other important topics. If there is anybody who wishes us to share certain things, you can actually drop us a line, comments, columns, and we will also look into that topics. Perhaps I think we can also, while we'll be working on the weekdays, right? I think all of us have pledged to make times. If there is an opportunity, we will then go on live again to share with you all the legal knowledge online, probably in the weekend when everybody are at home, have time to listen to us. Yeah, okay, so I think we will end here today, and we hope everyone is going to be stay home and stay safe at the moment until when everyone is ready to back to work. And always remember SOP in place before you start work. Okay, so we'll end here. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks again,
All right.
Jason.
All right. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, Mr. Jason. Thank you, Mr. Paul. Thank you, Mr. Dennis.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Bye.